next, but first, NHS England has said that data from a ransomware attack on NHS provider Synovis has allegedly been published online by a cyber criminal group. Synovis, which provides pathology services on blood tests, primarily in southeast London, was the victim of a cyber attack on June the 3rd. Well, here to tell us more is our reporter, Paul Harrison. Paul, thank you for being here. Just remind us first what happened.
Hi, Helena. Yes. So on the 3rd of June, a Russian-speaking cyber-criminal gang called Chilin hacked into the systems of Synovis. Now, Synovis is an NHS provider. Their services are used by 2 London NHS trusts, that being Guy's and St Thomas's and King's College Hospital, both predominantly based south of the river. But they've got a few other facilities across the whole city. Now, attempted cyber attacks aren't rare. You know, security experts are blocking these round the clock, 24 hours a day, every day. What made this attack different was that it was successful. First, it involved an encryption of Synovis's data system so that doctors and nurses were unable to use it. They had to go back to kind of an old school paper-based system when working on the ward. Then shortly after, a mass removal of personal data. Now, it's a bit unclear exactly what that data involves. Media reports suggesting it's data on blood tests for sexually transmitted diseases, blood tests for relating to cancer care, things like that. The criminal gang then present an extortion demand, not directly to the NHS, but to Synovis themselves, basically saying pay up or we're going to release the data. Now, as the NHS's public sector, they've said no. That's a kind of typical response for the public sector. You know, they're not going to deal with extremists, extortionists or terrorists. And that's why now we've seen this data being leaked on the dark web last night. OK, thank you for that roundup. How have the NHS, the hospital trust, Synovis, how have they all reacted to this? Yeah, well, the extent of the information that has been leaked, as I say, remains unclear at the moment. NHS England are not being explicit about the quantity or quality of that data. They're working with Synovis and the National Cybersecurity Centre, amongst others, on a full analysis of the leak. And both hospital trusts affected are still reporting a disruption to pathology services. That's blood tests in particular, but also things like procedures and operations around that too, as a result of the initial hack 3 weeks ago. OK. And what are the implications here for patients who have been affected? You know, should people be worried? Yeah, I mean, I suppose it depends how you look at this, really. As I say, it's still unclear exactly on the specifics of what data is out there. The BBC earlier reported that a sample of the data they have seen includes patients' names, dates of birth, NHS numbers, descriptions of the tests themselves. They're not saying that they've seen results of the tests in the leak, but that may still come out in the wash. At worst, there's a concern that the patients affected might be subject to secondary scams, obviously with their personal information being more easily accessible to scammers. And a lot of these patients who will have been using these services perhaps are vulnerable people in distressed states. At a minimum, it's just not very nice, is it, to have your personal data out there on the web, particularly data that you've trusted to be kept confidential by the NHS. Absolutely. Well, that's the real concern, really, that the NHS is involved here. You know, as you say, a government service that patients put their trust into. Yeah, exactly. And I've been speaking to a public sector cybersecurity expert who says it is the NHS and the way they're set up that actually makes them vulnerable to things like this.
If you take the NHS, for example, it's a very complicated beast. It's federated organisations. There's lots of different organisations within that. And that complexity means that if you're building a sort of a shield, an armour around those organisations, inevitably there are going to be points of weakness. And so the people who work in the NHS in cyber, and I've been involved in that space for over 25 years, are some of the very best people in the industry. But inevitably, because of the complexity of the organisation, weaknesses will be found. And don't forget, these people, the gangs that are doing this, are using the very latest technology. They don't have laws. They don't have regulations. They don't work 9 to 5. These people, their entire life is about puncturing a hole in that armour and taking this data and causing disruption.
Graham Stewart there. Now, some commentators are saying this could be the worst cyber attack in British history. Now, whilst that might be a little hard to quantify, certainly not very good news, is it? No, absolutely not. Well, Paul, thank you very much for that roundup. Paul Harrison there. We will keep you updated about the data leak as more information comes in.